How did the dogs of the Americas serve as substitutes for horses among the Spanish conquistadors? What prompted Columbus to dedicate an entire ship just for transporting dogs? What made the canines of the Canary Islands so renowned? In what manner did Columbus deploy his canine assault team onto Jamaica? And why did the legendary explorer believe that a single war dog was worth 10 of his conquistadors? For countless millennia, the indigenous tribes of the American continent thrived in splendid isolation, their lives unfolding across vast plains, dense forests, and rugged mountains, blissfully unaware of a distant eastern landmass teeming with its own peoples and histories. The fleeting incursion of the Vikings in the 11th century, a bold but ephemeral brush with the old world, left scarcely a ripple in their world, a mere whisper swallowed by the winds of time. For 5 long centuries thereafter, no European foot dared tread upon these shores, and with them came no echo of the panting breath or padded steps of Europe as canine companions. Yet, everything changed in a pivotal year, one that marked the dramatic close of humanity's lengthiest struggle, the Reconquista, a grueling, centuries-spanning clash that had gripped the Iberian Peninsula in a relentless vice of war and faith. It was in this moment of historical inflection, as the dust of that ancient conflict settled, that the brilliance of Christopher Columbus, a visionary mariner with an unyielding dream, shone forth. With a blend of tenacity, charisma, and sheer audacity, he secured the backing for what would become one of the most legendary expeditions ever to set sail. A journey that would bridge 2 worlds and unleash a torrent of change, carried not just by man, but by the fierce paws of Europe as four-legged warriors. It remains shrouded in uncertainty whether dogs accompanied Christopher Columbus on the ships of his inaugural voyage. Most likely, they did not. The sparse records of that first daring leap across the Atlantic offer no hint of canine passengers padding along the decks. But by the time of his second expedition, the great navigator's vision had expanded, and he turned his attention to enlisting four-legged allies for the journey ahead. More precisely, it was the Catholic priest Rodriguez de Fonseca, tasked by the Spanish crown with overseeing the meticulous outfitting of the fleet, who took charge of this unusual procurement. Under his direction, a substantial number of dogs, numbering in the dozens, were acquired, their presence signaling a shift in strategy for the conquests to come. These weren't mere pets or casual companions. The breeds chosen were formidable, sleek, swift greyhounds, labrals, and hulking, powerful mastiffs. Mastines, while they could have served as hunting dog, their true purpose lay far beyond the chase of game. They were living weapons, bred and trained for the brutal wars that loomed on the horizon with the indigenous peoples of the New World. This grim intent came to fruition in March 1495 during a fierce clash with the natives of Hispaniola. As the Spanish forces unleashed their firepower, cutting down the indigenous warriors with volleys of gunfire, the dogs played a chillingly effective role. The greyhounds darted through the chaos with lethal precision, knocking their prey off balance, while the mastiffs closed in with bone-crushing jaws, tearing into flesh and finishing what the bullets began. It was a harrowing spectacle, a fusion of European steel and canine ferocity that left no doubt about the dogs' purpose. They were not there to hunt rabbits, but to subdue and slaughter, cementing their place as indispensable tools of conquest in the bloody dawn of colonization. When the Spanish conquistadors set foot on the Caribbean islands, they encountered a breed of indigenous dogs that left them utterly astonished. These creatures didn't bark. To the invaders, accustomed to the sharp, echoing cries of their own greyhounds and mastiffs, these mute canines were an enigma, a quiet marvel amid the tropical clamor of the New World. Far from dismissing them, the Spanish saw potential in these native dogs and quickly set about blending their bloodlines with those of their imported breeds, creating hybrids suited to the demands of conquest. Beyond mere breeding, they went further, recruiting these indigenous dogs into their ranks, turning them into allies in their relentless campaign of domination. Dubbed pack dogs or perros cargados by the Spanish, these animals proved invaluable for transporting supplies, everything from food rations to weaponry, across the unforgiving landscapes where wheels faltered and rivers twisted. In this role, they emerged as a brilliant substitute for horses and mules, which the invaders increasingly reserved for the chaos of battle rather than the drudgery of haulage. The silent strength of these dogs, trudging under their burdens without a sound, offered a pragmatic edge to the Spanish, freeing up their precious equine stock for the clash of steel and blood. As Christopher Columbus, steadfast in his belief that he had stumbled upon islands lying just off the fabled shores of Cathay, China, prepared for his second grand voyage, he crafted a meticulous plan in concert with the Spanish royal court. This ambitious blueprint envisioned the establishment of a colony on these newfound lands, a strategic outpost along a future trade route linking the Old World to the riches of the East. Given its vast distance from Europe, this settlement would need to stand on its own, self-sustaining and resilient in isolation. Yet, when Columbus surveyed the resources of these islands, he deemed them meager, hardly sufficient to support both the incoming Spanish settlers and the native inhabitants. Sharing was never part of the equation. The conquistadors intended to claim every scrap for themselves, leaving no room for generosity toward the indigenous peoples. It was with this harsh reality in mind that Rodriguez de Fonseca, the priest entrusted with outfitting the expedition, prioritized the acquisition of dogs, not just any dogs, but formidable watchdogs and battle-hardened warhounds. These weren't mere hunting companions, they were guardians and weapons chosen to secure the fledgling colony and enforce Spanish dominance. The islands offered little in the way of game, only a small rodent, roughly the size of a rabbit, which the Spanish dubbed the husha. For such modest prey, a single dog often sufficed, its keen senses and relentless drive more than enough to track and take down the creature. Take, for instance, the tale of Columbus' brother, Bartolomeo, a skilled cartographer who, according to some accounts, may have planted the seed for his siblings' epic voyages. When Bartolomeo established a fortress on Hispaniola, modern-day Haiti, he left the garrison with just one dog for hunting. That lone canine, a testament to the efficacy of these animals, was deemed sufficient to sustain the outpost, underscoring the outsized role these four-legged allies would play in the brutal theater of colonial expansion. The conquistadors, however, pinned their hopes not on hunting creatures akin to rabbits but on far grander designs for conquest and colonization. When the ships of Columbus' second expedition were loaded, they carried a veritable menagerie, 24 stallions, 10 mares, 3 mules, and an assortment of pigs, cows, goats, sheep, and poultry. Among these, the horses stood out as the crown jewels of the cargo, prized assets for which space in the cramped holds was fiercely reserved, often at the expense of other valuable goods. Readers familiar with this author's series on the Crusades might recall the medieval art of transporting horses, suspended by ropes in the ship's belly, their hooves just grazing the floor, tended by dedicated handlers who fed them, shoveled away manure, and ensured the bindings didn't chafe their hides. After enduring the grueling sea voyage, these noble beasts had to be painstakingly retrained to walk on solid ground, their legs unsteady from weeks of confinement. The reason for such meticulous care was clear: these horses weren't destined for leisurely trots or pastoral labor. They were war machines, meticulously transported to wage battle against the indigenous peoples of the New World. Accompanying them were light cavalrymen, the caballeros recruited from Granada's seasoned riders whose expertise in swift, brutal combat had been honed in the final throes of the Reconquista. Together, this equine and human force was a calculated investment in domination intended to subjugate and annihilate the native populations. Far from being mere livestock, the horses were the beating heart of Spain's military strategy. Their thundering hooves poised to crush resistance and pave the way for colonial rule across the untamed lands Columbus had claimed. It seems the dogs were transported on a separate vessel, a deliberate choice to keep the other animals, horses, mules, and livestock from growing restless in their presence. These canine passengers weren't left to roam freely. Meticulous precautions were taken to ensure order and hygiene. To ward off fleas, their coats were closely cropped, and they were kept strictly on leashes, tethered to prevent chaos aboard the tightly packed ships. This rigorous protocol underscored their value not as mere companions, but as disciplined instruments of war, requiring careful management during the perilous Atlantic crossing. However, this system faltered during Columbus's fourth voyage, when a lapse in discipline led to a tragic mishap. One of the dogs, perhaps overcome by the thrill of open deck space after days of confinement, broke free and began frolicking unchecked. In its exuberance, the animal dashed too close to the edge and, in a heartbeat, tumbled overboard, vanishing into the churning waters near the Canary Islands. The loss was a stark reminder of the risks inherent in transporting such volatile cargo across vast oceans. A single moment of carelessness snuffing out a creature worth its weight in strategic gold to the expedition's aims. There is a compelling theory that the dogs for Columbus's expedition were procured during a deliberate stopover at the Canary Islands, a rugged archipelago that served as a staging ground for his transatlantic ambitions. The canines of this region were legendary for their ferocity, a reputation forged in blood and conquest. Into the 15th century, the Spanish had subdued the Canary Islands, all but wiping out the indigenous Guanche tribes in a brutal campaign where war dogs played a starring role. These fearsome beasts weren't newcomers to battle. As early as the 13th century, they'd been unleashed against the Moors on the Iberian Peninsula, their savagery honed over generations into a weapon of terror. A 16th century Spanish chronicler, Gonzalo Argot de Molina, immortalized one such dog, a fearsome creature named Mahoma, whose exploits earned it a special stipend from the royal treasury and the chilling moniker Moor Slayer. Under the governorship of Pedro de Vera, the Canary Islands became a grim theater for canine combat, hosting what amounted to championships of dog fighting. Here, the most vicious specimens were meticulously trained, their bloodlust cultivated to a razor's edge for maximum lethality. It is highly probable that these unstoppable killers, described later by historian Oviedo y Valdés as so ferocious that it took a grown man to restrain one by its collar as it strained for the fray, were the very dogs that embarked with Columbus. Their snarling presence aboard his ship signaled not just a voyage of discovery, but a mission of domination, their untamed power poised to leave an indelible mark on the New World. In 1493, Christopher Columbus returned to Hispaniola, steering his fleet toward the fledgling outpost of La Navidad, a fortress he de-established during his first voyage. His reflections on the endeavor dripped with a chilling arrogance, perhaps anachronistically labeled chauvinism for that era, as he boasted, "I ordered the construction of a tower, a stronghold, and a spacious cellar. Not out of necessity due to the locals. I am certain my man could subdue the entire island, for its people are naked, weaponless, and utterly timid." Yet, his confidence proved misplaced. The settlers he left behind had unleashed such a reign of terror that the supposedly defenseless natives, those same naked and unarmed inhabitants, rose up and slaughtered the intruders. Finding his outpost in ruins, Columbus had no choice but to sail along Hispaniola's northern coast, seeking a fresh foothold to plant his flag. Undeterred, he founded a new settlement and set his sights on a ruthless pacification of the island. Preparations began in earnest, with a particular focus on his canine arsenal. Special kennels were erected to house the dogs, and a dedicated handler was appointed, a man tasked with feeding and training these ferocious beasts into disciplined instruments of war. Later sources from the mid-16th century offer a glimpse into what we might call the young dog-ass training course. The regimen was brutal yet methodical. The dogs were sixed on an assistant clad in a thick, long-sleeved leather cloak, its heavy folds designed to mimic the garb of a foe. Armed with a stout club, this brave or perhaps unfortunate soul faced the onslaught, teaching the hounds to channel their raw savagery into precise, lethal attacks. It was a grim rehearsal for the bloodshed to come, a stark testament to Columbus's unyielding resolve to band the island and its people to his will. By 1494, the Spanish colony on Hispaniola faced a dire crisis. A devastating loss of pigs sparked a famine that gnawed at the settlers' resolve. In their desperation, they turned to the dogs, not the prized war hounds they brought from Europe, but the local breeds wrested from the hands of the indigenous people. These native canines, once companions to the islanders, became a grim meal for the starving conquistadors. Yet this act of survival was merely a footnote in the litany of horrors the invaders inflicted upon the aboriginal population. The Spanish unleashed a relentless campaign of terror, torching villages, seizing whatever scraps of food they could find, and launching savage raids that left devastation in their wake. Elderly men and children fell beneath their blades, able-bodied men were dragged off into slavery, and women were herded into makeshift brothels to serve the settlers' basest desires. Even Ferdinand, Columbus's own son, couldn't deny the bitter truth. This brutal policy of subjugation forged an unlikely alliance among the once scattered tribes. United by their hatred of the oppressors, they mustered a formidable force. Spanish chronicles, prone to exaggeration, claimed it swelled to 100,000 warriors, though modern estimates suggest a more realistic figure of around 5,000. Even so, for an island population pegged by contemporary scholars at roughly 80,000 at the close of the 15th century, this was an astonishing and ominous mobilization. The stage was set for a climactic showdown, and the Spanish braced themselves for war. Columbus had already tested the mettle of his war dogs months earlier on the shores of Jamaica. In May 1494, he attempted a landing on one of the island's beaches, only to be met by a throng of hostile natives brandishing spears and bows, their defiance palpable in the humid air. Hesitant to commit his man to a risky assault, he instead unleashed his canine shock troops. The dogs tore onto the beach with terrifying ferocity, their jaws snapping shut on the unprotected flesh of the naked warriors. In moments, the scene dissolved into chaos, limbs torn asunder, screams swallowed by the surf as the natives fled in abject terror. Later accounts attribute a striking declaration to Columbus. He proclaimed that a single battle-hardened dog was worth 10 armed conquistadors, a testament to the raw power these animals brought to his arsenal. By March 1495, with tensions boiling over on Hispaniola, Columbus resolved to strike first, preempting the growing native resistance. He marched inland with a formidable detachment. 20 cavalrymen astride their war horses, 200-foot soldiers bristling with arquebuses, crossbows, and steel blades, and a contingent of indigenous allies coerced or persuaded to join the fray. The first major clash between Europeans and the island-ass defenders loomed, a brutal encounter that would etch its mark on history. At its heart were the war dogs, not merely participants but pivotal players in the carnage that unfolded. Their snarling, blood-soaked contribution turned the tide in ways no sword or shot alone could have managed. But the full tale of that fateful battle, that's a story we'll dive into next time. Stay tuned for the gripping details.